Hi guys, Stack Lessons here. Got another 20 for you. This one's on networking edge routing, security and compliance, and cloud terminology distinctions. Quick countdown of 10 seconds per question. Then the answer. Pause if you need more time on any of them. Next up, let's work question 1. Parnell Aerospace is planning to migrate 3 on-premises servers to AWS and wants to evaluate the anticipated monthly cost before making any financial commitments. The finance team needs a detailed breakdown accounting for specific EC2 instance types and operating systems, Amazon RDS database engine and storage configuration, and estimated Amazon S3 storage volume and outbound data transfer. Which AWS tool is designed specifically to generate this pre-deployment cost estimate? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Cost Explorer and budgets both look right. AWS Pricing Calculator is a web-based planning tool that allows customers to model AWS architectures and generate detailed cost estimates before deploying any resources. Users configure specific service parameters such as EC2 instance type, operating system, tenancy, reserved instance or savings plan terms, RDS database engine and storage class, and S3 storage tier and data transfer volumes. The calculator produces a line-item monthly estimate with configuration details and can export the estimate for sharing with finance stakeholders. It is specifically designed for pre-deployment financial planning and infrastructure cost modeling. AWS Cost Explorer is an analytics tool that visualizes, analyses, and forecasts costs based on actual historical spending data from existing AWS accounts. Cost Explorer requires deployed resources with active spending history and is not designed for estimating costs before any workloads are provisioned. AWS Budgets allows customers to set custom spending thresholds and receive alerts when actual or forecasted costs approach or exceed defined limits. Budgets monitors active spending against predefined targets, but does not generate pre-deployment estimates for planned architectures. AWS Trusted Advisor analyses existing AWS resource configurations and provides recommendations across cost optimization, security, fault tolerance, performance, and service limits. Trusted Advisor requires active AWS resources to analyze and does not generate pre-deployment cost estimates for architectures that have not yet been deployed. Let us keep moving. Question 2. The wording is the clue. Northwind Media stores user-generated video content in Amazon S3. Videos uploaded in the last 30 days receive frequent access. Videos older than 90 days are rarely accessed, but must be retained for 7 years, and require retrieval within milliseconds when requested. The team wants to minimize storage costs for the oldest tier. Which S3 storage class should be used for videos older than 90 days? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Milliseconds is the keyword that eliminates 3 options. S3 Glacier Instant Retrieval is purpose-built for rarely accessed data that still requires millisecond retrieval latency. It provides lower storage costs than S3 Standard or S3 Standard IA while meeting the immediate access requirement. S3 Standard is optimized for frequently accessed data and is more expensive than needed for a rarely accessed tier. S3 Glacier Flexible Retrieval has retrieval times of minutes to hours, which violates the millisecond access requirement. S3 Standard IA is designed for infrequently accessed data, but is more expensive per gigabyte than Glacier Instant Retrieval, making it a poor fit for a rarely accessed long retention tier. Let us keep moving. Question 3. The scenario tells you the trade-off. Margie's Travel processes customer flight bookings through an order placement service that receives up to 600 requests per second during peak holiday periods. The downstream reservation fulfillment service can safely process only 40 bookings per minute without becoming overloaded. No booking must be lost even if the fulfillment service is temporarily unavailable, and both services must be able to scale independently of each other. Which AWS service provides durable message buffering and decoupling between these two services? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. 600 per second into 40 per minute means Amazon SQS is a fully managed message queuing service that provides durable, persistent buffering between producers and consumers. The order placement service writes booking requests to the SQS queue at any rate, and the fulfillment service polls the queue and processes messages at its own sustainable rate of 40 bookings per minute. Messages are retained in the queue for up to 14 days by default, ensuring no bookings are lost even when the fulfillment service is temporarily unavailable. This architecture decouples the two services so each can scale independently without either becoming a bottleneck for the other. Amazon SNS is a publish-subscribe notification service designed for fan-out delivery to multiple subscribers simultaneously. SNS does not persist messages. If a subscriber is unavailable when a notification is sent, the message is not delivered and cannot be recovered. SNS provides no buffering between producers and consumers running at different rates. Amazon Event Bridge routes events to targets based on matching rules and supports retry policies, but it is not designed to buffer sustained high-volume request differences between a fast producer and a slow consumer. Event Bridge is optimized for event routing and integration patterns rather than rate smoothing across service boundaries. AWS Step Functions orchestrates multi-step workflows with state management and branching logic, but it is not designed to buffer high-volume requests or absorb the sustained rate mismatch between a service producing 600 requests per second and a service consuming 40 per minute. Time for another one. Question 4. Do not rush the wording. Tailspin Games is launching a global real-time multiplayer platform with game servers running in the US East 1 region. The platform uses UDP for low-latency game state synchronization. Players in Europe and Asia report high latency and packet loss because their traffic traverses the congested public internet all the way to the US. The network team wants to route players to the nearest AWS Edge location, and then carry their traffic over AWS's private global backbone to the game servers. Which AWS service should they use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. CloudFront and Route 53 both seem close, but UDP breaks them. AWS Global Accelerator improves performance by routing user traffic to the nearest AWS Edge location, using Anycast IP addresses, then forwarding it over AWS's private global network backbone to the application endpoint in US East 1, bypassing the congested public internet for most of the journey. Global Accelerator supports both TCP and UDP protocols, making it directly suited for real-time UDP-based gaming workloads. Amazon CloudFront is a content delivery network designed for caching and distributing HTTP and HTTPS content, such as web pages, images, and video. It does not support UDP protocols and is not designed for stateful, real-time application connections. Route 53 with latency-based routing provides DNS-level direction to the lowest latency region, but does not route traffic over a private backbone. After DNS resolution, traffic still traverses the public internet for the full journey to the server. AWS Direct Connect establishes a dedicated private link between an on-premises data center and AWS. It is designed for enterprise connectivity from on-premises infrastructure, not for improving latency for end users distributed around the globe. 4 options all sound like routing tools, but only one handles UDP over a private backbone. Imagine you're playing a shooter from London, hitting a game server in Virginia. Your packets crawl the congested public internet. You feel every hop. CloudFront looks tempting. It uses edge locations too, but it only speaks HTTP and HTTPS. It caches web pages, not live game state. Route 53 latency routing does smart DNS. It picks the nearest region. But after that, your packets still hit the full public internet. Direct Connect links your corporate data center to AWS, not players around the world. Global Accelerator is different. It catches your traffic at the nearest edge city, then carries it over AWS's private backbone, skipping the public internet. And it speaks UDP natively. That's the combination this question is built around. Time for another one. Here's question 5. A startup is deploying their SaaS platform on AWS to serve customers in the United States, Germany, and Japan. German data protection regulations require that all data belonging to German customers be stored and processed exclusively within Germany. Which AWS global infrastructure concept allows the startup to satisfy this data residency requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Country-level data residency always maps to one concept. AWS regions are distinct geographic areas that contain multiple physically separated availability zones. By deploying the German customer workload to the EU Central 1 region located in Frankfurt, the startup ensures that data is stored and processed within Germany. AWS guarantees that data does not leave a region unless the customer explicitly transfers it, making regions the correct mechanism for satisfying country-level data residency requirements. Availability zones are isolated data centers within a single region. They provide redundancy and fault isolation, but do not themselves determine in which country data resides. Edge locations are points of presence used by Amazon CloudFront for caching content, and by Route 53 for DNS resolution. They are not full compute environments suitable for storing customer application data. Local zones extend AWS compute and storage services closer to dense population centers for latency-sensitive applications, but are not the primary mechanism for enforcing cross-country data residency compliance. First 5 questions set the foundation. Know which tool plans costs before deployment, which S3 class grants millisecond retrieval on cold data, and why regions own your country-level data residency story. Ready. Question 6. Watch the exact wording. A solutions architect at Woodgrove Bank is preparing a cloud economics presentation for the CFO. The CFO has 2 questions. First, why can AWS offer significantly lower per-unit infrastructure costs than the bank could achieve running its own data centers? Second, why the bank can handle a sudden surge in transaction volume during a market event without having pre-purchased excess server capacity year-round. Which pair of AWS cloud concepts correctly explains these 2 benefits, respectively? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. The order in the question dictates the order in the answer. Economies of scale explains AWS's ability to offer lower per-unit infrastructure costs than individual organizations. AWS aggregates hardware purchasing, data center operations, and energy consumption across millions of customers worldwide, enabling bulk purchasing agreements with vendors and highly optimized facility designs. These savings are continuously passed on to customers through reduced service pricing. Elasticity describes the ability of cloud resources to automatically scale capacity both upward and downward in response to actual demand. The bank can absorb a sudden transaction spike without pre-purchasing idle capacity, because resources provision on demand within minutes, and scale back down when the surge subsides, incurring cost only for what is actually consumed. The reversed ordering placing elasticity first and economies of scale second is incorrect because the question specifies the cost reduction benefit first and the automatic scaling benefit second. High availability and fault tolerance describe system resilience and uptime guarantees rather than pricing advantages or automatic resource scaling. Global infrastructure and scalability describe geographic reach and the general capacity to grow, but do not specifically address AWS's aggregate purchasing power or automatic bidirectional scaling. Let us switch gears. Question 7. Classic exam trap. Coho Winery is evaluating serverless compute options for two distinct workloads. The first is an event-driven image thumbnail generation process triggered by S3 uploads that runs for 10 to 25 seconds per execution with unpredictable frequency. The second is a containerized inventory analysis job that runs for up to 8 hours, requires 120 gigabytes of memory, and must not be exposed to the public internet. Which TU compute services best match these workloads respectively? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option A and option D. Lambda's hard 15-minute limit kills one of these instantly. AWS Lambda is the ideal choice for the image thumbnail generation workload because it is event-driven, completes well within Lambda's 15-minute maximum execution timeout, scales automatically in response to S3 event triggers without any infrastructure provisioning, and is billed only for actual compute time consumed. Lambda is optimized for short-lived, high-frequency, unpredictable workloads where serverless economics deliver the most value. AWS Fargate is a serverless compute engine for containers that eliminates the need to provision or manage EC2 instances. Fargate supports containerized jobs running for many hours, allows precise CPU and memory configuration to meet the 120 GB memory requirement, and handles the underlying infrastructure automatically. Running the containerized inventory analysis job in a Fargate task within a private VPC subnet satisfies the requirement for no public internet exposure. AWS Lambda cannot execute the inventory analysis job because Lambda enforces a hard 15-minute maximum execution timeout. A job requiring up to 8 hours of continuous runtime exceeds this limit and would fail. EC2 on-demand instances can technically run the thumbnail function, but introduce infrastructure management overhead and do not provide the automatic event-driven scaling that Lambda delivers natively. Amazon EKS adds Kubernetes control plane complexity and operational burden that is unnecessary for a single containerized batch job without cluster orchestration requirements. Let's slow down here. These two workloads need completely different compute services, and the exam tests exactly that. Imagine you have two jobs at Coho Winery. First, every time a photo lands in S3, resize it, done in 20 seconds. Lambda is built for exactly that. It fires on the upload, runs your code, shuts off. But the second job crunches 8 hours of inventory data and needs 120 gigabytes of RAM. Lambda has a hard 15-minute timeout. That job dies every time. Fargate, AWS's serverless container runner, handles long tasks for hours. Drop it in a private VPC subnet and it never reaches the internet. Lambda for the quick burst, Fargate for the marathon. Let us switch gears. Question 8. Look for the constraint that matters. Conteso IoT is designing a back-end system for a fleet management platform that ingests telemetry from 500,000 connected vehicles. Each vehicle type reports a different set of attributes. Some report GPS coordinates and fuel level, others report GPS coordinates, battery state, HVAC status, and tire pressure. The system must accommodate this schema variation without requiring application changes, sustain millions of write operations per second, and return individual vehicle record lookups in single-digit milliseconds regardless of fleet size. Which AWS database service is the best fit for these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Schema variation across items points straight to one database. Amazon DynamoDB is a fully managed NoSQL key value and document database built for applications requiring single-digit millisecond latency at any scale. Its schema-free design allows each item in a table to carry a different set of attributes, naturally accommodating the varying telemetry fields across vehicle types without schema migrations or nullable columns. DynamoDB scales horizontally and automatically across partitions to sustain millions of write operations per second, using on-demand or provisioned capacity mode. Amazon Aurora MySQL and Amazon RDS for PostgreSQL are relational databases that enforce a fixed schema across all rows in a table. Accommodating variable attribute sets would require nullable columns or separate tables with joins, adding complexity. Neither service scales horizontally to millions of writes per second without significant sharding and operational complexity that falls outside the managed service boundary. Amazon Redshift is a columnar data warehouse optimized for complex analytical SQL queries over large historical datasets. It is not designed for the high concurrency, low latency individual record lookups, and continuous high throughput writes that characterize an operational telemetry ingestion workload. Keep your focus here. Question 9. Several choices sound plausible. Litware Incorporated runs a public-facing e-commerce platform and wants to protect against two specific threat categories: large volumetric network and transport layer DDoS attacks that could exhaust bandwidth or connection capacity, and application layer attacks embedded in HTTP requests, such as SQL injection and cross-site scripting. The security team also needs access to a dedicated response team during active attacks and wants financial protection against unexpected scaling costs during a DDoS event. Which two AWS services should Litware deploy? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option C. Shield Standard's missing feature is exactly what this question tests. AWS WAF is a web application firewall that inspects HTTP and HTTPS traffic at the application layer and blocks requests that match rules for known attack patterns including SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and other AWS Top 10 vulnerabilities. WAF rules evaluate request content such as query strings, headers, and body before the request reaches the application. AWS Shield Advanced provides enhanced protection for resources including EC2, Elastic Load Balancing, CloudFront, Route 53, and AWS Global Accelerator against sophisticated and large-scale DDoS attacks. Shield Advanced includes 24/7 access to the AWS DDoS response team for attack mitigation assistance, and crucially, provides cost protection, AWS credits scaling charges incurred on protected resources during a DDoS attack, which directly satisfies the financial protection requirement. AWS Shield Standard provides automatic baseline DDoS protection at no additional cost for all AWS accounts, but it does not include DDoS response team access or cost protection, making it insufficient for Litware's requirements. Amazon Inspector is a vulnerability assessment service that scans EC2 instances and container images for software vulnerabilities. It does not provide runtime traffic inspection or blocking. Amazon Guard Duty is a threat detection service that analyzes CloudTrail, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs to identify suspicious behavior. It does not block network traffic. Keep your focus here. Question 10. Avoid the familiar but wrong answer. Conteso Media has a web server in a private subnet. The network team adds an inbound rule to the subnet's network ACL allowing HTTP traffic on port 80. After the change, clients can successfully send HTTP requests to the server, but never receive any responses. What is the most likely cause? Select 1. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. The word stateless is the entire explanation here. Network ACLs are stateless, meaning they do not track the state of a connection. Unlike security groups, a network ACL requires explicit rules for both inbound and outbound traffic. When a client sends an HTTP request to port 80, the inbound rule permits it to reach the server. However, the server's response travels back to the client on an ephemeral, dynamic port, typically in the range 1024 to 65535. Without an explicit outbound rule permitting traffic on those ephemeral port ranges, the network ACL drops the response before it leaves the subnet, creating exactly the one-way communication symptom described. Security groups are stateful. If inbound traffic is allowed, the corresponding return traffic is automatically permitted without a separate outbound rule. Because the security group would not block responses once inbound traffic is allowed, it is not the cause here. Network ACLs fully support HTTP on port 80. The problem is the missing return traffic rule, not the protocol. Evaluating rules only for new connections describes stateful inspection, which is the opposite of how network ACLs behave. They evaluate every individual packet independently, regardless of whether it belongs to an existing connection. Let's trace exactly where the response dies, because this one trips up a lot of people. Imagine you call a store and get through fine, but the store can't call you back because your number is blocked. That's this question. The client's HTTP request arrives on port 80, the inbound rule covers it, but the server's response doesn't go back on port 80. The server picks a random high-numbered port, maybe port 52341, called an ephemeral port. The network ACL checks every outbound packet independently. No stateful memory at all. There's no outbound rule for those ports, so the response gets dropped. Security groups would allow the return traffic automatically. They remember the connection. Network ACLs don't. 1 rule in, 0 rules out. That's the trap. Questions 6 through 10 surfaced ordering traps in cloud economics terms: Lambda's 15-minute ceiling, DynamoDB's schema freedom, Shield's 2 distinct tiers, and the NACL stateless catch that silently drops all return traffic. All right. Question 11. The obvious answer may be bait. Datum Financial Services must manage the cryptographic keys used to encrypt highly sensitive trading data. A regulatory mandate specifies that all key material must reside on dedicated, single-tenant hardware security modules, where the company maintains exclusive control, and the cloud provider has zero visibility into key operations. Which AWS service satisfies both the dedicated hardware and zero provider visibility requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. KMS with customer-managed keys still fails the single-tenant test. AWS Cloud HSM provides single-tenant hardware security modules dedicated exclusively to each customer. The data plane is end-to-end encrypted and not visible to AWS, meaning AWS has zero operational visibility into key material or cryptographic operations performed within the HSM. Customers manage their own HSM user credentials entirely outside of IAM, so AWS cannot retrieve or observe cryptographic operations under any circumstances. AWS Key Management Service with customer-managed keys uses AWS Managed, multi-tenant HSM infrastructure. While AWS cannot retrieve plaintext key material from KMS, the underlying hardware is shared infrastructure managed and operated by AWS, which fails both the dedicated hardware requirement and the zero provider visibility requirement. AWS Secrets Manager is designed for storing and rotating application secrets such as database credentials and API keys. It is not a hardware security module and does not provide dedicated cryptographic hardware or the isolation guarantees required by the mandate. AWS Certificate Manager Private Certificate Authority is a managed service for issuing private SSL/TLS certificates within a PKI hierarchy, and does not provide dedicated HSM hardware for general-purpose cryptographic key management. Let's pause here. This one trips up a lot of people because KMS sounds like the obvious answer. Imagine your compliance team hands you a rule: 300 million trading records need encryption keys on dedicated hardware, and the cloud provider cannot see any of them. That second part is the trap. AWS Key Management Service, KMS, feels right because you own the keys, but KMS runs on shared machines that AWS operates. No dedicated hardware. Cloud HSM is different. You get a hardware security module, a physical chip, that belongs only to your account. AWS is blind to what happens inside it. Secrets Manager is for passwords and API tokens, not cryptographic hardware. The punchline: dedicated hardware plus zero provider visibility. That combination only exists in Cloud HSM. All right. Question 12. Follow the operational constraint. Contesso Research runs genomics analysis jobs that process DNA sequences in batch. Each job uses checkpointing and can be interrupted mid-execution and resumed without data loss. Jobs typically run 2 to 4 hours, and new jobs are submitted continuously throughout the day. The team wants to minimize compute costs. Which EC2 purchasing option should they use? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. Checkpoint plus interrupt tolerance is the Spot shortcut. Spot instances provide access to unused EC2 capacity at up to 90% discount compared to on-demand pricing, making them ideal for fault-tolerant, interruptible batch workloads. Because the genomics jobs use checkpointing and can resume after interruption, they tolerate the 2-minute interruption notice AWS provides before reclaiming spot capacity. On-demand instances provide flexible compute but at full price, which does not minimize cost for a workload that can tolerate interruption. Reserved instances require a 1 or 3 year commitment and are best suited for predictable steady-state workloads running continuously, not batch jobs submitted sporadically. Dedicated hosts provide physical server isolation for licensing or compliance requirements and carry a premium price, making them inappropriate for cost-sensitive batch processing. Okay. Question 13. Reason from the scenario. Relic Cloud's e-commerce platform processes customer orders through 4 independent downstream systems: an inventory service, a shipping service, a notification service, and a fraud detection service. Every order event must be delivered to all 4 services. If one service is temporarily unavailable, order events must not be lost. Which architecture best meets these requirements? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. One shared queue for 4 services is a competitive consumer trap. The fan-out pattern using Amazon SNS with individual SQS queue subscriptions is the standard AWS architecture for delivering one event to multiple independent consumers reliably. When an order event is published to the SNS topic, each subscribed SQS queue receives its own copy of the message. If a downstream service is temporarily unavailable, its SQS queue retains the message until the service recovers, preventing data loss without requiring the order service to retry. A single SQS queue shared by all 4 services uses a competitive consumer model, where each message is delivered to only one reader, so each order event would reach only one of the 4 services rather than all 4 simultaneously. Synchronous HTTP calls tightly couple the order service to all downstream services and cause cascading failures when any one service is slow or unavailable, violating the resilience requirement. Polling DynamoDB on a schedule introduces processing latency, requires each service to track its own read position to avoid duplicate processing, and adds complexity without the built-in durability and delivery guarantees of SQS. Okay. Question 14. Wording first, memory second. Contesso Retail is evaluating two architectural approaches for its e-commerce platform. Approach A uses EC2 auto-scaling to automatically add instances during traffic spikes and remove them when demand drops, with no human intervention required. Approach B allows engineers to manually add instances when traffic increases, but those instances are never automatically removed when demand subsides. A cloud architect describes a key cloud characteristic that Approach A demonstrates which Approach B does not demonstrate. Which characteristic is the architect referring to? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. Automatic and bidirectional are the two words that separate these. Elasticity is the ability to automatically scale computing resources both upward and downward in response to demand changes, without manual intervention. Approach A demonstrates elasticity because the system grows and shrinks automatically based on actual load. Scalability describes the general ability to handle increased demand by adding resources, but it does not require the scaling to be automatic or bidirectional. Approach B is scalable because it can grow, but it is not elastic because it requires human action and does not automatically release excess capacity. High availability refers to designing systems to minimize downtime through redundancy and failover, not to dynamic resource adjustment. Fault tolerance describes the ability to continue operating with zero downtime even when components fail, which requires even greater redundancy than high availability, and is unrelated to automatic resource scaling. Here we go. Question 15. Separate context from noise. Tailspin Research operates a genome sequencing laboratory that has accumulated 2 petabytes of raw genomic data on local NAS appliances. The data must be migrated to Amazon S3. The laboratory's internet connection delivers a sustained 100 megabits per second throughput. The IT director has calculated that uploading all data over the internet would take approximately 6 months. Which AWS service should they use to complete this migration most efficiently? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option B. AWS's own rule, longer than 1 week means Snow family. AWS Snowball Edge storage optimized devices are purpose-built for petabyte-scale data migrations when network transfer would take too long. Each device holds up to 80 terabytes of usable storage, and multiple devices can be ordered and loaded in parallel, reducing a 2 petabyte migration from months to days or weeks. AWS recommends the Snow family when a network transfer would take longer than 1 week. AWS DataSync automates data transfer to Amazon S3 and EFS, but uses the existing network connection, which is constrained to the same 100 megabits per second bandwidth, and would take the same 6-month transfer window. AWS Direct Connect provides a dedicated private network connection with higher bandwidth, but provisioning the circuit takes weeks, and even a 10 gigabits per second connection at sustained utilization would require approximately 18 days for 2 petabytes, making it slower than physical shipment of multiple Snowball devices. Amazon S3 transfer acceleration routes uploads through CloudFront Edge locations to reduce latency and improve throughput, but it still operates over the existing 100 megabits per second internet connection and cannot overcome that fundamental bandwidth ceiling. The middle run covered Cloud HSM Zero Provider Visibility Guarantee, Spot's Checkpoint Advantage, SNS fan out over a shared SQS queue, Elasticity's automatic bidirectionality, and Snowball's 1-week network transfer threshold. Here we go. Let's work question 16. Litware Incorporated is migrating production workloads to AWS for the first time. Their operations team requires 24/7 access to cloud support engineers via phone, web, and chat, full access to all AWS Trusted Advisor checks, and AI-powered troubleshooting assistance. They do not need a dedicated technical account manager. Which support plan meets these requirements at the lowest cost? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Match each requirement to a plan tier, then stop at Business. Business Support Plus is the minimum plan that satisfies all stated requirements. It provides 24/7 phone, web, and chat access to cloud support engineers, a guaranteed response time of less than 30 minutes for business-critical system down cases, full access to all AWS Trusted Advisor checks, and AI-powered contextual troubleshooting assistance. A dedicated technical account manager is not included in Business Support Plus, which aligns with the stated requirement to exclude that feature. Basic support covers only account, billing, and service quota questions without access to cloud support engineers or any technical support SLA. Enterprise on-ramp support provides a pool of technical account managers and faster response times, exceeding the stated requirements while carrying a higher monthly minimum cost. Enterprise support adds a designated technical account manager and even faster response times, again exceeding what is needed and at significantly higher cost. Next up, question 17. Close is not correct. Adatum Financial has deployed a customer database on Amazon RDS for MySQL. The security team is mapping out responsibilities under the AWS shared responsibility model. Which two responsibilities belong to Adatum Financial, not AWS? Select 2. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answers are option B and option D. Customer always owns data protection and access control on managed services. Under the shared responsibility model, AWS manages infrastructure, hardware, the hypervisor, host OS patching, and physical facilities for managed services like RDS. This is security of the cloud. The customer retains responsibility for their data and how it is protected, including encryption decisions, and for IAM policies that control which principals can access the RDS service. These two responsibilities belong to the customer regardless of which managed service is used. AWS patches the underlying host OS and hypervisor for RDS automatically. Replacing physical hardware and maintaining physical network infrastructure are AWS responsibilities as part of running the global infrastructure. Next up, question 18. Convert the story into selection criteria. Fabricam Manufacturing operates a large on-premises data center that generates 50 terabytes of production sensor data daily. Their AWS-hosted analytics platform requires consistent, high-throughput access to this data. The network team has experienced unpredictable latency and bandwidth limitations over their existing internet connection, and needs a dedicated private connection to AWS that bypasses the public internet entirely. Which AWS connectivity service meets this requirement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option D. 50 terabytes daily on a congested internet link points immediately to AWS Direct Connect establishes a dedicated private network connection between an on-premises data center and AWS, bypassing the public internet. It provides consistent bandwidth, predictable latency, and reliable network performance, making it well-suited for high-throughput workloads such as transferring 50 terabytes of sensor data daily to an analytics platform. Note that Direct Connect is not encrypted by default. Organizations requiring encryption can add a VPN overlay or use MACsec on 10 or 100 gigabits per second connections. AWS Site-to-Site VPN creates an encrypted tunnel over the public internet, which introduces the same variable latency and bandwidth constraints the team is trying to eliminate. AWS Transit Gateway is a network transit hub that connects VPCs and on-premises networks to each other, but is not itself a physical connectivity solution from on-premises to AWS. Amazon CloudFront is a content delivery network for caching and distributing content to end users, not a mechanism for data center to AWS network connectivity. Now, question 19. Check whether it asks what or why. Adatum Media operates a global video streaming platform with all content stored in Amazon S3 in the US East 1 region. Users in Singapore and Tokyo report high latency when streaming videos. The team wants to reduce latency for all global users without replicating S3 buckets to multiple regions. Which AWS service should they implement? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option A. Global accelerator routes but never caches, that distinction costs points. Amazon CloudFront is a content delivery network that caches content at over 400 globally distributed edge locations, including locations in Singapore and Tokyo. By caching video files at edge locations closest to viewers, CloudFront reduces the geographic distance data must travel, and significantly lowers latency for streaming media without requiring S3 bucket replication. AWS Global Accelerator improves performance for dynamic, non-cacheable content by routing traffic over the AWS private global network backbone to the nearest healthy endpoint, but it does not cache static assets and would not reduce latency for static video files the way a CDN does. Route 53 with latency-based routing directs users to the lowest latency AWS endpoint, but without content caching, users in Asia would still retrieve video data from the S3 bucket in US East 1. AWS Transit Gateway is a network hub for connecting VPCs and on-premises networks, and has no role in improving content delivery latency for end users. Let us keep moving. Question 20. Do not skim the condition. A solutions architect at Conteso Bank is presenting cloud design approaches to the executive team. The CTO asks the architect to clarify the difference between high availability and fault tolerance as system design goals. Which statement correctly distinguishes these two concepts? Select one. Review the answer choices on screen. The correct answer is option C. Minimizes downtime versus eliminates downtime is the entire distinction. High availability, HA, is a design goal that minimizes the probability and duration of downtime to within an acceptable threshold defined by a service-level agreement. Systems designed for high availability use redundancy and fast recovery mechanisms, so that failures cause only brief, bounded interruptions. AWS publishes SLAs expressed as uptime percentages. Even 99.99% uptime still permits approximately 4 minutes and 23 seconds of annual downtime. Fault tolerance is a stricter design goal requiring a system to continue operating without any service interruption or data loss even when individual components fail. Fault-tolerant architectures eliminate every single point of failure through complete active redundancy at every layer. Achieving true fault tolerance is significantly more expensive than high availability because it requires maintaining fully active redundant components rather than warm standbys or automated recovery mechanisms. High availability and fault tolerance are not interchangeable. The critical difference is whether any downtime is acceptable. High availability tolerates brief interruptions within defined SLA bounds, while fault tolerance requires zero interruption regardless of which components fail. The geographic scope of redundancy, single region versus multi-region, is a separate architectural decision independent of the HA versus fault tolerance distinction. Both goals can be pursued within a single region using multiple availability zones or extended across regions for even higher resilience. Neither concept is tied to a specific mechanism such as autoscaling or multiple accounts. High availability and fault tolerance are architectural outcomes achievable through combinations of elastic load balancing, multi-as deployments, autoscaling, cross-region replication, and other redundancy patterns selected based on the specific failure scenarios the architecture must survive. This one trips up a lot of people. Let's break down exactly what makes these two goals different. Imagine a bank where one ATM breaks midday. High availability means another ATM comes online within 60 seconds, brief gap, barely noticed. Fault tolerance means your transaction goes through even as the ATM dies. A second ATM was already running the same job in parallel. Two very different promises. The word correctly is doing heavy lifting here. 3 of the 4 options sneak in false details. They pin high availability to a specific service like auto-scaling, or pin fault tolerance to multi-region setups only. Those are mechanisms, not definitions. The real divide: high availability accepts a small amount of downtime. Even 99.99% uptime allows 52 minutes of outage per year. Fault tolerance demands 0. That's why C wins. 3 takeaways from this session. First, network ACLs are stateless. Add explicit outbound ephemeral port rules or responses never leave the subnet. Second, Cloud HSM is the only AWS service where AWS has 0 operational visibility into key material. Third, when a fast producer meets a slow consumer and durability is required, SQS buffers, SNS alone cannot. Stateless ACLs, HSM isolation, high availability versus fault tolerance. This batch was built on fine print distinctions. Now you can draw every one of those lines. Keep going. Quick one before you leave. Subscribe so the next set finds you and so YouTube puts these in front of more learners. Comment your score and any question you'd want explained further. Want a specific exam next? Drop it below. And if the pace or visuals could be better for you, I genuinely want that feedback.